and we'll also be recording today's session as well. So let's get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ashley Ring. I'm a customer advocate and project manager at OWL, and I'll be hosting this webinar. You'll be muted during the webinar, as I've mentioned, but if you have any questions, please type them into the chat section of GoToMeeting, and one of our customer advocates will answer you directly during the session. There will also be a question period at the end of the session where I'll be fielding any questions written into the chat section. Today's presentation will be approximately 20 to 30 minutes long, with a 15-minute question and answer period at the end. Today's webinar is intended to be a tutorial for existing users only, so we'll be hopping right into the new feature and skipping over an overview of scheduling since you're all very familiar with it. During the webinar, we'll be talking about the following features. Oh, let me just scroll back here. We'll be talking about setting up your therapist profiles with respect to the new availability logic. We'll also be talking about the new types of availability we've launched, general and specific. We'll be showing you the new availability view in our calendar. We'll be talking about the availability of services, and then we'll also talk about how that affects online booking for your current clients. So let's dive in. I'm going to switch over to OWL now to show you a view of this account, which you're all very familiar with. When you add a therapist to your OWL account, you would typically assign their working hours. So if I come into settings here and I go into therapist, you'll see my therapist profile. If I select that therapist and click edit, what you would have done before was assign the working hours here. You would have seen a grid with the hours where you would have been able to input and add hours. Now you'll see that that's been separated and we actually have this availability option up at the top of your page where the hours are set. If you were to add a new therapist to your practice, you can now assign their availability separately from their therapist profile. So you'll see here when you do create a new therapist, if I were to come in here and add therapist, down at the bottom of this window, you'll see availability and scheduling. This window lets you know that you can edit the therapist's availability by going into that availability window. And it will also let you know that when you create a new therapist, their hours default to 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. So they will have a default set of hours and you can go in there and change them as needed. So if you want to change that predefined availability, you would come into your therapist profile, click the availability button, and you'll see this window opens. Now we have here two components to the availability. We have what's known as general availability and specific availability. General availability is very much like the hours you would have assigned before. It's the overarching schedule of your hours or this therapist's hours on a weekly basis. So it's your schedule for the long term. It allows you to establish static, set hours on a weekly basis. So for example, if you do work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that would be your general availability. And you can see here, the availability is set up in blocks the way that it always has been. You can click on a segment here to change the hours. You can remove that slot if you need to. You can also create breaks by clicking in this window here and adding other segments as needed, moving them around. You still have that same capability with how you manage the general availability. I'm going to just remove this slot here. The specific availability is where the nuanced setup comes into play. Specific availability is a way of creating dynamic patterns in your scheduled hours. So for example, if you typically work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but have decided to also work some Saturday afternoons for the next 2 months, you could layer those hours into your availability for the short term. You can create patterns that will recur for a certain period of time and then end when needed, resuming the pattern established by your general availability. So think of the general availability as, like I said, that long-term first layer of generally when you're working. Specific, allowing you to customize different hours for when things change. So like I said, you can create these nuanced patterns. In specific availability, you'll see we view the month and every day with all of these blue blocks representing what the general availability is. You can scroll through to other months to see how your schedule carries over. You can also click on the month here to scroll long-term further into the future as needed. You have options to view the month. If we want to flip ahead to November, we can do that. So let's say I wanted to say that I was working on Saturdays for the month of November and December. I can actually click on this white space here to add a block of time, and you'll see it gives me a start date and an end date. So let's say maybe I'm working on Saturdays from 11 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. I can change that. It makes sure that my hours that I input here are correct and align. I can also choose whether or not this would be a recurring pattern. So let's say weekly. It'll give me an end period, and I can say I'm going to be working these Saturdays weekly until December 22nd. And then I can go ahead and update that, and you'll notice it puts a new working hour into my calendar for those days. If I go back to general, you'll see I'm still not working on Saturdays because that's not a typical day for me, but in specific, I've been able to layer in some different hours for a different period of time. And you'll see if I flick through the view, the pattern of not working Saturdays resumes after that recurrence has ended for me. So you can see how it's very helpful to layer in those different hours for yourself. You can also click into existing days here. So you'll see if I click on a white space in this calendar, it'll allow me to add a block, and it will do that starting at the end period from the block that's in there already. So if I were to say, actually, I'm going to be working from 8:30 p.m. until, let's say, 10 p.m., I could add that in as a block in that day. And I could say this is recurring daily for a week. I can update that, and you'll see now I have multiple segments in my specific availability that show breaks. So if I'm working 8 a.m. till 7:30, and then I'm working again from 8:30 until 10, I can create those blocks as needed. It's important to remember that the general availability is that first layer of your schedule, and the specific is the second layer. So anything you input into specific will override your general for that period of time that you've chosen. Once that period has ended, the general availability resumes automatically without you having to make any changes or remove those blocks from the schedule. And like I mentioned, you have recurrences too. So when you do create blocks and you want to set a recurrence, you can create those patterns for daily, weekly, bi-weekly, every 3 weeks, or every 4 weeks, depending on your preference. When you choose to create a recurrence, you're always prompted to set an end date for it, so it knows how long that period of working hours lasts. If it's for an indefinite amount of time, at that point, you'd be using the general availability. If you're going to be working Saturdays for the foreseeable future, you just layer that into the general. So that's how we've changed scheduling and given you a little bit more control over the kind of working hours that you can offer in your own schedule. And it's very easy, like I said, to click on a segment as needed, to remove a slot from a specific day even, if you need to, and update and manage your schedule. One of the things that we've changed here that's important to know is that therapists will have the ability to go into their own schedules and make changes. Previously in Group Edition, we restricted that as part of the settings in OWLs. The practice owner or the office admin could go in and set up the therapist schedules, but now therapists will be able to come in, click into the settings section, and see their own profile and make changes to their own hours as needed. So with all of these advanced options for availability, we've also made it easier for practices to view the availability of their therapists at that practice, which is especially helpful for group practices and the office admin users who manage all of the appointments and scheduling. We come into the calendar here, and you'll see we do a specific day with all of the therapist names and their availability. So you'll see here, if I click on this clock icon here in my calendar, it'll render a day view, and it'll show me the availability per each therapist that I've selected in my sidebar here. So you'll see if I uncheck one of these therapists, they'll be removed from the view, and I'll just be seeing the ones that I've selected. You can see here, it displays by a specific day. So I'm in one day only, but if I needed to, I could flip ahead to future days to see the availability for each therapist that I've selected. Again, I can scroll forwards and backwards. It's a specific day view. So you'll see here, it loads, and I can change my view and add people into it as needed just by selecting. So you can see it gives your practice a lot of visibility into the schedules for each of their therapists. When you are in the availability view, it's important to remember that all of the events you're seeing have been labeled as either client, personal, or unavailable. So you'll see here when I'm looking at my calendar, I can see those client events, I can see those personal events, and I can also see, if we flip ahead, anytime someone is unavailable. And the unavailable segments here appear grayed out in difference to your client sessions or your personal sessions, and they also say the name at the top of them for why they're unavailable. So when you want to schedule that period of time to show a therapist is working, but not intending to be client-facing, you can use this new unavailable event type that we've created. I'm just going to go back to my week view, and I'll point out that the availability view here is read-only, so it's meant to show you the hours and how the resources are allocated, but it's not a scheduling view. So if I wanted to schedule a period of time where someone wasn't available, I'd click into the calendar, same as I would for scheduling a session, and you'll see the new event type here, unavailable. I can put in a name for unavailable, so maybe I'm busy because I'm booked at a conference. I can say a location if I want to as well and add any comments, and you have control over the timing too. So if my end time is actually going to be, let's say, 1 p.m., I could put that in there. And I can also create recurrences too with my sessions of unavailability. And I would just click create, and it'll put that block off into my calendar here. And you'll see that. Unavailable event types function the exact same way that personal event types do. They're meant to put a block of time in the therapist's schedule when you're not available for client sessions. Personal events should be used for sick days, vacations, lunch breaks, etc. Whereas unavailable events, they're used to represent working hours when the therapist cannot be client-facing. So for instance, if you're working on research, if you need to provide supervision for another professional to practice, or if you're participating in a conference, it's meant to show when you're working but not client-facing. Whereas personal can now be used in its proper HR capacity of noting when someone is not at the office when they were scheduled to be. So the third thing that we've done here to expand your customization of availability is layer in availability on your services and into your service menu. So I'm going to come in here to settings, and I'm going to go to services and fees, and you'll see I have my service menu here. What we've done here is layer in availability to the services too for better booking with your clients online. So if you come in to see an existing service, let's say for instance, I'm going to open the CBT individual session. You'll notice before what you would do is assign your service name, duration, type, grade, price, etc. And that was it. Now there's another aspect in this window here that says availability. And you can actually flag a day of the week to say that the service is available, and you can leave the hours open-ended as much as you need to, or you can customize the hours that that service is available. So for instance, you'll see here, this service is not available on Sunday, Tuesday, or Saturday, but it's available Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And if I wanted to change that, maybe I don't start offering the service until 11 a.m. on Monday, or maybe I only offer it until 5 p.m. on Wednesdays. It gives you better customization of when services can be booked at that practice. The settings that you establish here are respected by the online booking portal and translated accordingly to clients when they're looking to book those sessions. So if I were to save the setup here for my services and then go into the client portal, if I wanted to book, for instance, that CBT session, individual, if I choose that service type and then go to, for instance, let's flip ahead in our calendar to Tuesday, November 6th. It's just going to take a second to refresh here. But you'll see here it doesn't give me Tuesday as an option because it's not available to be booked on Tuesdays. Same with Saturdays and Sundays. And you'll see here we also set this service up so that it was available starting at 11 a.m. on our Monday. So you'll see here it's not going to show me times before 11 a.m. based on that setup that we've done. So the online booking portal can become more customized now to when services should be booked by your clients. The one thing that I'll note that's really important though is that the service availability does not block or prevent any staff internally from booking sessions outside of it. So if an office admin still wanted to go ahead and book a session on a Tuesday, let's just go back to our calendar here. If I still wanted to book, let's say my client Jessica here for the CBT individual on a Tuesday, she could go ahead and do that because it's not going to be blocked off internally. We only facilitate that barrier for your clients through the online portal. The setting isn't meant to restrict the sessions that your staff book because presumably they know when those sessions are available and when to book them. And if you still want the option to override and offer that service on those days to clients, you can do that internally at the practice. I'll point out as well that the service setup here in settings and customizing when those services are made available is only permitted to practice owners and office admins. So your therapist users who don't have access to settings at the practice and changing the timing on those services won't be able to make changes there either. So that takes us through the major changes that we've made to availability. We've opened up your therapist schedules so that you can, let me just go back here, so that you can have better options for your availability. We've created these general and specific type of availabilities to layer in your working hours. We've expanded the calendar to give you a more in-depth view of when those resources are available. We've also added that unavailable event type, which helps block off working hours internally, which will be respected by online booking, and the service availability as well, also respected by the online booking site. So we've made quite a few changes to the way that you can schedule within your practice, each individual therapist, and assign their working hours. That's everything I wanted to show the group today. It's fairly straightforward, but I know it is a big fundamental change to the way that you've been setting things up previously. So I anticipate there'll be a lot of questions from the group. I hope that these new availability features help everyone manage their therapist schedules and session bookings much more seamlessly. I know having this view in particular is very helpful to group practices who have a lot of therapists and oftentimes want to compare schedules. So I know that that'll be a big help to everyone. That's all I'm going to tell you about the feature now in the webinar. Let's open up our question and answer portion of the webinar because I'm sure all of you experienced OWL users have a lot of questions about this feature. I'm going to go into the chat section here and just scroll through to see if we have any questions so far. Okay, it looks like Kate has a question. Would it be a good idea for a clinic to use the general availability settings to indicate center hours, and then they can use the specific availability to indicate therapist availability within the center hours? That's a really interesting question, Kate. Essentially, what the hours due, they're tied to therapists individually. So if you wanted to, you could assign general center hours to each therapist in their settings here. So if the center is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you could give everyone that layer of availability in their schedule and then customize further with specific if you wanted to. But what that means is even if the therapist isn't working those hours, let's say they don't work on Monday 9 to 5, but you put that in their general availability, you would then need to come into specific for that therapist and essentially remove that slot. And when you remove it in specific here, you're removing it just for that day. So if they don't work on that Monday, you would actually have to come in and say a recurrence. So I might want to say daily until, let's say, the end of the month and remove slot. Then it'll take it out for that period that I've defined using the recurrences. And you'll see because I set a daily recurrence, it cleared my whole schedule, not just those Mondays. If I had said weekly, it would have cleared out those Mondays. So the recurrences have a lot of power here in how they're used. I think using the general availability as the center availability might not be the best implementation of it. This should be reflective of that therapist's schedule individually. Great question, though. Kate, another question. Is there any way to mass delete blocks of time then? Because if you have a therapist that works only Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you have to delete each one individually. So that's only if you're in specific. And again, that's where the general comes into play, right? So the general is when you're working. So if that therapist doesn't work on, Monday, I would just remove that. And then Mondays are never in their overarching schedule. But in the specific, if there was a Monday where that practitioner did want to work, I could click on an individual slot. So maybe on October 15th, they are going to be working. I can update and I can add hours into their day. So think of that general, like I mentioned, as the overarching schedule. When does that person typically work throughout the week? If anything nuanced or different happens in that schedule on a day-by-day basis, you can use the specific to set that up. From your general availability, you can still create blocks throughout the day too. So let's say this section here, if I was only working a split shift until 3 and then I wanted to add time generally after the fact, I can do that and add that in there and have a split schedule that's always respected. I can remove blocks for days that I don't work, but then as things change, I can go into specific to add different things. And you'll see here that split shift is now represented in my schedule. So if we come back, you'll see that's in there. So you do have a lot of power with how you can change that therapist schedule in the specific. And I would recommend trying different things with it to see how it plays out for each therapist that do have nuanced schedules, but generally refer to general availability as the overarching schedule and specific for minute changes that you need to make. Okay, let me just see. Perfect. Okay, Kate, I see that you've got it. Yeah, the general section is for if they wanted to add a period of time on a trial basis, or if they had an odd day, they could add their schedule for the specific. Yes. Candace said watching this online was very helpful. I would like to add again to the powers that be about Owl, how good Owl looks online. The white background with the light gray for hours lines, very difficult to read. I really hope someone looks into this. Okay, so commentary on accessibility. Thank you, Candace, for noting that. We can take that away following our session here. Kareem, is there a way to schedule group workshops? That's a great question, but it doesn't relate to therapist scheduling and therapist hours. That's more related to how you would book those workshops in the calendar, and I'm happy to discuss that too. From the calendar here, typically when you're going to book workshops for groups, we've set up groups so that they're booked separately. If you're used to the way we use Circle of Care now to book multiple attendee sessions, you know if you have a Circle of Care and you choose a couple or a family type session, it'll bring those other attendees into it. But if you're booking a group session, so you'll see here if I choose Jessica and I come in here and I choose a couple session, you'll see how it brings in those other attendees from her Circle of Care. With groups, it's booked separately per person because we assume that that client is unrelated to the other attendees in the workshop or in the group. So you would book them all concurrently in the same slot for the same service type. So let me just come back here to my settings and make sure that I do have a group service that I can show you. Let's say that it's 60 minutes. This group type here will denote that it's a group option. Let's say here that we've got it set up. I'm going to create service. I'll also mention while I'm doing this that with your availability on services, by default, when you go to add a new service, the availability is wide open. So every day from midnight until midnight, day to day, and you can change that as needed. So I'm going to create that service here and come into the calendar and just show you this. So if I were to book a group session for Jessica, we're going to choose that group service. So for Jessica, she's attending that group workshop and she's going to be paying the fee that's associated to that group session. And then for the other people that I book, they'd be booked individually and expected to pay their portion of that session as well. And it looks like it might be because I just created this service new, but it's not picking up. There we go. The fee. So I would create that session, and then let's say we have someone else attending that group workshop at the same time. I would just go into my calendar here, click the space, type in another client who's also attending the group workshop, and then we'd put them concurrently in the calendar together for as many attendees as need to be part of that group. And then they would each be marked either attended or canceled or no-show, depending on the individual, and billed separately their group fees. I hope that answers that question for you, Kareem. I know it's a little bit of a deviation from what we're talking about in terms of therapist availability and scheduling, but it is a great question, and it is something that's helpful to know. You're very welcome. Are there any other questions right now from everyone who's online about the availability, the new feature, the event type? Feel free to ask them in the chat here. I'm just going to give a minute in case the people who are online are typing or writing. This feature is live now, so it's available to all of you in your accounts. And I'll mention too, for all of the therapists that you have set up now, their schedules in terms of their availability are still maintained and respected. So whatever hours you've defined for yourself or for other therapists at your practice are still there. You just have the added ability now to create specific availability in their schedules. Amanda, you tried updating the availability but not saving it. I think that might be something we'll have to talk about offline. There might be something that you're doing differently. If you want to just contact support@owlpractice.ca to show us the details of what you're experiencing, one of our advocates can help you with that to find out if there's an issue. Let me just see here. Connor, would you be able to give us a preview of other additional features that you're working on? That's a great question as well. We're working on a lot at OWL right now. Nothing that I can show you overtly here, but one of the things I'll point out that's very similar to availability in terms of giving you more flexibility as a practice, we're actually underway on a feature called locations. And I know this feature will be really helpful for practices or even just practitioners who operate out of multiple office spaces and locations throughout the day. So we're setting up the ability to have other locations as part of your practice. Right now, when you go into settings, you'll see here that you just set up your practice details for one location, but we're going to create a new tab that'll let you key in details for new locations, as many as you need to, and you'll also be able to set up your therapists to work at specific locations. And you'll be able to, if I come into therapists here, you'll see how I can go into availability. You'll be able to create these kinds of schedules at all of the varied locations that therapist works at. So that's another feature that'll be coming out soon that we're really excited about, that ties into availability in a lot of ways. I see another question here from Candace. As I look at this online, I see that there's a line through some appointment slots. I suspect this signifies a session already booked. I'm not sure specifically what you're referring to, Candace. I see that there's a line through some of the appointment slots. Are you looking in your practice, or are you meaning in the calendar here, seeing these sort of horizontal dashes through those? The difference here is, again, you're seeing actual sessions versus periods of unavailability. So we put that hash through these sessions here to show you that it's non-client facing and to make that distinction between a session and a period of unavailability. We've also given them, if I move this segment up so that it fills the whole space here, it'll be a little easier to see. You'll see we've also put this white banner on the top of them, same as we have for personal sessions, and we've marked them as unavailable. So you can see visually their distinction. Okay, Candace, yes, so you said you're in therapist availability specific. Okay, so you're looking at your therapist, and let me just open this up here. You're looking at specific availability, and you're saying you see a line through some of these blocks or these sessions. That might be something we'll have to look at separately. Again, if you just want to email support@owlpractice.ca, we can look at your specific instance and find out what you're seeing that deviates from what's expected here. Amanda, will you be adding ability to do third-party billing through OWL? Also, another great question. That's a feature that's been very highly requested. It is something that is on our roadmap, likely something that we'll be looking at for 2019. No official delivery date or ETA yet, but it's still something that we're researching and planning for. Feel free to type any other questions. We'll be online for another 5-6 minutes or so, answering any questions, and then we'll let everyone get back to their very busy days. I see Diana says fax capability from within OWL would be great too. I believe that feature has also been logged on our side, and our product engineering team has it in review. But I'll make a note that that's something you'd like to see as well. You're welcome, Diana. Connor asks, how about the ability to toggle the year at a glance data? I see. So are you meaning to be able to see the entire year in terms of a therapist schedule, or are you looking at a calendar view for the year? I'm just wondering more specifically, oh, the dashboard, I see. How about the ability to toggle the year at a glance data? That's a great question too. So the way that the dashboard is set up now, if I just X out of here, The year over year here is still the same, and you still have the same ability to see your comparison between the current year and the year prior, but you can see at a glance how you're doing in terms of session growth and revenue growth. And of course, you can use the data exports to always pull any reporting you need financially for any given period of time. So if you did want to pull a year's summary of, sessions or accounting exports, you could do that through the data export section here. Candace asks, as a single therapist, is it possible to have personal, unavailable, etc. in different colors on the schedule? That's a great question. Right now, everything follows the color coding for your profile as a therapist, but I can log that as a request as well to see if it's something we could potentially enhance for singular therapists. We've had similar requests for different colors for different types of appointments too. And even though our color coding is standardized per the therapist that session is booked with right now, we have that request under consideration and review as well. You're very welcome. Connor, if you are talking about therapists viewing the revenue at a glance, I believe we have a request for this tracked already too, just to clarify in the reporting there. And of course, if you do want to see reporting per therapist, you can also pull the therapist payment export. This report will show you data by therapist, and you can apply a filter to filter it to show and then sum the data per each therapist. So I could pull this report from January 1, 2018 to the current day or to the end of my year, and then put a filter on my provider column to filter it by therapist, if that helps. And you'd like to see it by service, counseling, assessment on the dashboard view. Oh, interesting. Okay. I can follow up on that request as well. You're very welcome. Wonderful. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them. I'll be ending the webinar shortly. And if there is anything that you want to ask, feel free to always reach out to our group, support@owlpractice.ca. If you think of any questions after the fact, we're always here to answer your questions. I'll also point out that our help page on our website here does have articles about the new availability features too. So if you come into our support page here and scroll through our articles, you'll see there is a section here for availability. And if you click into this, there are detailed walkthroughs about how to use custom availability, setting up your schedules, using that view in the calendar, and dealing with your services. So remember, you can always come here to read these FAQs. They have really great insights about the feature and screenshots that will walk you through step by step how to make these scheduling changes for your practice. Okay, I see a question from Lorraine. If I wanted to make sure the therapist has the same lunch break each day, do I use specific to block out the time period? Example, 12:30 to 1. This is a really great question, Lorraine. You can do this in a couple of ways now. So what you can do is actually from your therapist's profile here, if I go into availability, you can create that as part of their general availability. Typically, if you want to create a break for lunch in the day, you could just structure their general availability. So Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, I work from 9 till noon, and then I work from 1 until 5 because there's an hour break in the day. So you could create that here. And then when you're in the calendar, you'll see a grayed out segment when that person's not working. Or what you could also do is just create the availability, and from the calendar here, if there's always going to be a lunch period for someone, what I could do is click on that time of the day. So let's say I click on noon here. I'm going to schedule a personal event for, let's say, Ian, and this will be his lunch break. So I could say that's from 12 to 1, and I can just put a recurrence on that. And I could say that this is recurring weekly after let's say 52 occurrences, create, and I could create that break in the schedule for each day of the week and repeat it, or you could do that through your general or specific availability as well by just segmenting the schedule in that way. When you're in your availability view here, you'll see there's gray periods that reflect when that therapist is not working versus the white periods in the calendar when they are. So you could just set up their schedule with general, like I said, with those breaks for lunch break to show that they're not available, and you'd see a gray segment in the middle of their day for that lunch hour, or you could create them as personal blocks if you want. In that case, then they are working, and if they did want to take a client, you could remove that block and put a client scheduling in. So there's a couple ways you could go about it, and that's really up to you for what you think is the best way. Connor says the online resource is awesome, but he has to go. Thank you so much. You're very welcome, Connor. I'm so glad you had time to join today, and please refer any questions through to our support team as needed. That's our time today for the webinar as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate it, and I hope this feature is helpful. I look forward to seeing a lot of feedback and commentary from everyone through the support channel. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.